may have to rejoin.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the SEO is AEO series, how to help Google, Amazon make sense of a chaotic, unstructured web. Today, we've got Martha, Aaron, and Arnout on board to tell us exactly how we can do that and what the stakes are, and perhaps even we'll get an insight into what the future is going to be. I'll introduce the guests quickly. Before that, though, please do join the conversation. You can ask your questions in the group chat, in the chat by the window here. Please do ask questions. It's a great opportunity to ask questions of these incredible experts. And also, feel free to join the conversation on Twitter or on LinkedIn with the hashtag SEO is AEO. Right, so Martha, we'll start with you because I met you yesterday for the very first time. You're in Canada, you're Canadian. Your name makes me think of Holland somehow.
Yes. Yeah, my husband is Dutch, so I'm representing the Dutch Canadians today.
Great. And you speak French?
A little bit, yes.
Oh, you said on your LinkedIn profile, I speak French, so I was going to have a little chat in French there with you.
Je peux parler français, oui.
Très bien. Moi, je peux parler français aussi. Et on peut continuer. No, we better not continue like that because nobody will understand. There is actually a French webinar next week on a very similar topic, so maybe you can join us for that.
Yeah, my French schema isn't as good as my English schema.
Well, in French, you have that old problem is that all the language is in English, and then you put everything in French, and that can be quite not difficult but confusing. And I understand you went to the UK for university.
I did. Well, I went to Queen's University in Canada, and then I had the opportunity to go play field hockey and live in Scotland at University of Strathclyde. And then I did an executive degree at MIT.
That's really cool. I'm terribly, terribly impressed because in the north of Scotland, it's very, very cold. I come from Yorkshire in the north of England where it's pretty cold. If anyone's interested, I'm in France. Martha is in Canada. We have Arnout here who's in Holland. So there is a Dutch connection here. I saw that you're working for a babysitting site?
Yes, I am, 2 days a week. But apart from that, I do freelance SEO and a lot of analytics stuff. That's it. I'm based in Amsterdam. And
you used to work for a flower company, which is very typically Dutch, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, that as well. And before that in telecoms, France Telecom and Telecom Italia. So, yeah, I've had my fair share of different business and industries. Yeah.
Well, I read your LinkedIn profile, so I'm going to say something you're going to hate. You're a growth hacker.
Yeah, exactly. That's what people call me, but I'm not a big fan of that word.
No, I couldn't resist it because when you say I'm not a big fan, I have to say it.
Yeah, I understand.
Well, thank you for turning up. It's really brilliant. I know we had a couple of chats, and you've been sharing some information with me on things that you're going to be saying later on. It's going to be really, really interesting. Cool. And then Aaron, who I've never met. Lovely to meet you.
How's
Good
it
morning.
going?
It's 6 a.m. for you, yeah?
Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. The Canadian contention is strong today.
And now, I'm not sure if I got that right, but you're living where Martha was born, and Martha is living where you were born.
It's a big country. There's lots of room for all of us. So yeah, I'm on the West Coast now, and
she's on the East,
where I've lived before too. And also, to your earlier point, my people are all from Yorkshire way back. So
really,
connection as well. Yeah,
we're kind of brothers.
Indeed, yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, I'm terribly pleased about that because you're one of the people. I've seen you around a lot. I've read a lot of your tweets and your G+ posts, and you've taught me an awful lot. So I've been terribly keen to have you on and dig into your brain in a philosophical manner. And you work for Electronic Arts. That must be pretty cool.
That's true. The video game manufacturer, been there, 4 or 5 years now. Never a dull moment.
And you're building their internal knowledge graph.
Yep.
For
my sins, that is pretty much the case. I deal a lot with content models and ontologies and taxonomies related to that enterprise.
Oh, cool. Because we've had Gennaro on from wordlift.io, and I've seen a couple of things about internal enterprise knowledge graphs, and I didn't know much about it until 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's becoming very much a thing. small outfits you may have heard of with internal knowledge graphs include Amazon, Netflix, Airbnb. Everyone's doing it these days.
Oh, okay.
No, maybe not everyone, but increasingly so.
That's because it's cool.
It's cool. And
apparently fun, Aaron, yeah?
Fun. It has. It's challenging. It's an emerging field, so always some growing pains, and many days do I actually know what I'm doing, but I muddle by.
You muddle by, or you muddle by?
Muddle.
Right. Lovely to meet you. Thank you for coming along. I think this is going to be an amazing episode. Off we go. I'm going to do a little introduction of things that I thought were incredibly interesting, points that I wanted to make, starting with this trio of strategy, which I like to think was a strategy. We're going to talk about that later compared to SEO, perhaps more tactical, with the idea of relevancy, understanding, and credibility are the three key points that we need to understand, which if you've watched the series before, you'll have seen that diagram several times. Now, I discovered the other week, Bill Slavsky sent me a link to Xin Luna Dong's presentation, and then some papers she'd written. She's now my new favorite person. She's building an Amazon product knowledge graph. And then if you read the rest of it, she's doing all these knowledgey things with data cleaning, collecting data, information extraction. And before that, she was at Google. So she's obviously very, very, very pertinent person to be listening to. And she did this diagram that I redrew because I thought I could do better. And in fact, I couldn't. The idea that we've got all these entities and all these attributes that we've managed to understand with the head knowledge, and it's collected by manual curation, importing large databases. And the big question is how to collect all the gray bits, which is unknown entities and unknown attributes in a scalable way. Obviously, we can't keep curating if we're going to collect all this information. And she looks at it with 4 types of web sources: texts, DOM, which is basically web pages, tables, and annotations, which is stuff like schema markup. Now that I say it like that, it seems terribly simple. It took me a couple of days to get my head around it. So the first question is going to be based on that. So the annotated web, which is what Luna Dong talks about, is basically schema and structured data. How can we as marketers best leverage schema? Martha.
Excellent. So whenever we talk about schema markup, we often talk a little bit about, I call them like rich snippet hunting, or, really sort of tactically. And we're going to talk about tactics versus strategy. But during this time, I thought I'd talk a little bit about strategy, because the question here is around marketers, not necessarily technologists, but as marketers, how do we best leverage schema? And so when I think first of the benefits of it, there's great evidence, both from our customers at Schema App, as well as sort of Google's published case studies, that the benefits go well beyond the click right now. So it goes well into what I call like the quality of traffic or engagement, sort of right through that customer experience. And so depending on the type of business, if you're in a babysitting business, it may mean that you're getting more babysitters booked. If you're in the game business, it might mean that the right people are landing on the right content and engaging with that content to then maybe engage in the community or buy a different game of the same sort. But really for marketers, if we're thinking about that customer experience and across the way, we need to kind of think of the whole experience. The second thing then is when we're thinking about that whole experience, we also need to think about like the changing world. We're going to spend some time at the end talking about the future, because schema markup is how you also control how your information is being understood. So just like marketing is a control point today for what images people use or what text type or what color they're using for your brand, think of schema markup as a way that you can use to control the understanding of the language and the content that you have. And so when you think of it as a marketer, right now, because so many, and I call them machines, but like consumers, so that Amazon, that Google, that Siri, that Alexa, that Facebook voice, like people are consuming this and basically controlling that customer experience. And so as marketers, we want to make sure we do this. So one last point then is around what do you add schema markup to? So people, when they're going after just the featured snippets, they'll be like, well, I just want to get the review snippet, so I'll just mark up my reviews. Or I just want to get that product rich snippet, so I'm just going to mark up the availability, the price, and perhaps the review and the description of the product. But I always talk about like when Google, Yahoo, Bing, and Yandex sat down and created schema.org, they didn't like just create 850 plus classes, for shits and giggles, right? Like there's reason that they created that extensive vocabulary. And part of it's because it helps their understanding, but also it's because they're they're using it. Garrett Eilish, I think he said in a couple of conversations and presentations, it helps us understand, and we're using it, and it makes sense, right? If we're making their jobs easier, why wouldn't they use it? And so when I talk to marketers, I often ask, what's unique and strategic about your business? What do you need people to understand? Because if these machines like Amazon and Google are helping by understanding the content, then you want to make sure that those things are understood. So that may not just be your products and your organization. It may be the services you offer, the people in your organization, some of the key content that you've written. And so when I talk about creating your schema markup strategy, talk at the business value first, and make sure that those things are, one, documented, the content somewhere in a one place, ideally on the website. So that's sometimes when you ask that question, it actually spurs other content and organization questions. And then look at what you can also get from Google and Bing, and then combine those two in order to inform that strategy and how you can leverage schema.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, what I heard there, a couple of things is, one is that you're talking about communicating so that they understand how you want to be presented, and they'd have no reason to present you in any way other than the way you want to be, unless you don't deserve to be. So it's communicate to be understood. And the other is that the consumers are actually machines, and that the people are consumers of this information, the schema information, only in a secondary manner. Brilliant stuff. I thought that was great.
Yeah, think of the audience as not people anymore. So you have to think about it differently.
Cool, great stuff. Next up, having gone through that pretty quickly, is tables and lists. Obviously, this seems terribly simple. We think a table is structured or a list is structured, but it's devilishly tricky. I saw a paper that Bill Slawski once again shared that with Arnout. And please tell us, why are tables so devilishly tricky?
Well, it's because people are not creating them in the best way. So they're missing the caption tag or the table headings or the table rows, and just put in data. And without that, you basically don't tell a search engine what the whole context of that table is. And if they don't understand that, then how can they make sense of it? And I think that's the biggest issue that I'm seeing. And when not a lot of marketers know this, but there is a separate search engine for tables in Google that you can actually use. And just putting in some of the keywords / search intent you wanna rank for or get a feature snippet for or get into Google, then you can easily find like loads of things on how other websites have done it properly. But a lot of people aren't setting it up properly, so Google doesn't know when to show what. And I think that's the most made mistakes. I'll share the link to their table search just after the webinar, but you can just Google it. Google table search, and you'll find it. One of the other things that I noticed was what you can easily do is using search modifiers to say in URL and then your domain name. So it will come up with all the tables that Google has found and has indexed in the table search. And you can do it for competitors as well, for main keywords, for loads of other things. I think, but it really helps you understand it's basically structuring data so that search engine can make sense of it. So I think that's why, that's how you can do it. And you'll also find that loads of websites aren't doing it correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I read that 99% of all tables on the web are used for design and not for structuring data, which I find phenomenally big percentage. And the problem is actually finding tables that actually say something. As you said, the context around the table is not always clear, and you've got the whole semantics, because finding out what the context of the table is to understand what the data is saying, because people don't put captions, as you said earlier on. Brilliant. Yeah. I love that. And I'm going to go and play with the web table search engine. Sorry,
can I add one thing quick? We've actually also seen some rich snippets appear directly informed from tables. They're not documented, but we're seeing that information pulled in, not only in the search, informing the search, but in the actual rich result.
I know. That's what I meant. I've seen it with babysitting rates, where you just say a 16-year-old earns this, and a 17-year-old should earn this. So yeah, they are picking it up. But I was just basically saying that it's a great way to do research if Google is picking up your tables.
Yeah,
you know, and
sorry, go
we've
ahead.
seen them. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is to what you guys were referring, but we've certainly seen them pick them up in terms of featured snippets where they're extracting tabular data and presenting that in the search results. So not a rich snippets in the sense that they're derived from structured data, but the regular parsing of web pages. But what's ironic about that, and ironic with, in my view, of featured snippets from tables, is that it's really, 1994 HTML. I mean, it really is table tag, th, td, and all of those standard tags. Whereas most tables, even ones that are informational rather than for design, though certainly including those, are done with CSS these days. So ironically, you have to use an older technology for Google to understand your tables properly. And I've even seen SEOs do things like add just a table with table tags and TDs and THs in a no script because they know that Google can't understand their CSS tables. So it's kind of funny. And then, of course, sorry.
Go ahead.
Pass it over after this, but of course, I'd be remiss not to bring in dataset and dataset tables that Google has recently started to index. So, where the semantics of CSVs, in this case, tab or comma limited text files, has until this point been pretty much opaque, but through using structured data markup, people can now inform Google of what a formal table, a CSV table, is all about. And I wouldn't be surprised if some point in the future they maybe started to make that level of semantics available to kind of regular tables.
Okay, so marrying structured data and CSVs to schema markup, and possibly in the future doing that through tables. Well, brilliant stuff. Super. Next up, DOM extraction from web pages. Once again, it's extracting data here from HTML. Sites like Yelp and Amazon always got reasonably good HTML. Most of my clients don't. Google, obviously, and Amazon, in fact, need to extract that. I know that Graphic are looking into that, and also Diffbot terribly keen on it. How can we make that DOM digestion? I don't know if that's a real word, but I've just decided that it is. How can we make DOM digestion easier for these machines? Consumers.
Sure. First of all, use structured data annotations if at all possible. That's going to obviously let the search engines know what a piece of content is about. But if you're not doing that, you kind of don't need to do anything special except be consistent and be big, which isn't terribly helpful, and you may not know how to get there. But if you look at Amazon as a history, so Amazon quite famously has never used structured data markup on their pages, right? But it's not as though they have not got rich snippets or enhanced search results. You certainly see this both in Google and Bing. Google kind of come and go, but normally in the normal course of things, you wouldn't be awarded rich snippets if you didn't have structured data. But Amazon's kind of an important website, so what Google does is parse that data. And because Amazon has a fairly well-known structure, I don't think it's probably too difficult for Google to come up with parsing routines by which it says, oh, I'm encountering a product page, here's the price, here's the reviews, here's all this. So kind of take a clue from that if you're, you're not using annotations, but the more in which you use a standardized layout and format, the more in which Google is going to be able to make sense of those tables. And, it wants to try and extract value from any data that it encounters. So there's, aside from being standards based, there's really nothing you can do to facilitate that. I'll just notice in passing, I'm not sure if any of you have heard of diffbot. It's a new knowledge graph that's come out, where it claims to have 10 times, I think, or 100 times the number of facts as the Google knowledge graph. And they're really not using annotations. They've just gone through and parsed the entire web and then tried to extract the facts and relationships from that data. So a little structure goes a long way in facilitating an understanding of what a web page is about.
Yeah, that's where I actually started hearing about the DOM digestion idea. It was from diffbot. I mean, what I hear there, you said it wasn't a big comment or this a big step, but consistency, and it's the most difficult thing for me, at least, to get my clients to do. And it seems to me terribly obvious that if it's consistent, then the machines will be able to make sense of it, and if it's not consistent or inconsistent, it's going to create enormous problems, especially with machine learning coming in. You're saying that they managed to analyze and understand Amazon. There's no reason they shouldn't do that with other biggish sites.
Exactly, and often sites too, I guess, on that regard, based on templates. So the more in which you're using kind of standard enterprise products, like Magento or for e-commerce or WordPress for blogging, the search engines come to a pretty good understanding of how that's structured and how they can extract data from that. But if you're using your own bespoke platforms, again, make sure they're consistent.
Brilliant, super stuff. The last part of my little part here with the free text, natural language processing, relatedness, co-occurrence, topical siloing, semantic triples, all terribly interesting phrases that I didn't know what they meant 6 months ago. Now I kind of do. But machines, Google, Amazon, Graphic, and diffbot are getting better and better at understanding this free text. How can we as marketers, what's our best approach to content creation given what I just mentioned? Martha.
Oh, I got to jump in on this one. So I actually think Aaron just hit the nail on the head here, which is around consistency and quality and understanding. So, I'm seeing nods from Arno, who I think can probably jump in on this one with me. And, the reason I say that is that in essence, all the consumers, the machines, Google, is trying to service the client. In fact, we were talking yesterday about Amazon, right? And, Amazon's taking a very service-based approach about sort of skills and sort of answering questions. And so when you're creating content, to me, it's the same thing, right? If you're stepping back and doing the business thing before you're asking the SEO question around, what questions are you trying to answer for your customers? What type of, logic are they going to go through as they understand it? And then, be consistent and logical in how you set up your text. And the reason I bring that, there was a customer site that I was recently looking at, and their schema markup was very basic, but they had they were even just using their H2 tags and H1 tags and H3 tags very, very well to articulate what was a question and what was an answer and what was the topic of the page, very much using the language. So I think it really starts at that foundational SEO standpoint where you're thinking about what makes the content rich and helpful and of service to your clients, and then use some of that structure in the page to help everyone understand it, as well as making sure that you're then adding the schema to Aaron's point, to take it that explicitness even further.
Super. So we come up with consistency again, and logic, and that's perhaps what humans are not necessarily the best at doing. Right. So that's the Lunar Dong part finished with those 4 different ways that these machines are extracting data from an unstructured web. Now we're going to move on to more general questions. This one for Aaron. In my mind, I mean, obviously not today, but it's always been about language. I always thought semantics equals language. It's not at all, is it? That's a completely silly way of looking at it.
I don't know if you're presenting epistemological questions at 6:30 in the morning for me. It may be a little difficult as we get into Husserl and Heidegger. No, semantics is, I mean, at that level, yes, semantics may not be all about language, but to a certain degree, you always have to map something, a meaning, which is what semantics is about, to something concrete that you can describe, and that tends to be language for humans. But to poke at this a bit, no, semantics, things can have meaning that aren't themselves directly described by language. So if I have a picture of a banana, it's about a banana, and it's a type of fruit, and all these things are ultimately, at the end of the day, it's language, but you can have semantic associations that aren't language based. You can have meaning that's derived from some system that isn't ultimately dependent directly upon language, and what we see increasingly in the web, and in terms of, again, AI and ML are starting to feature very large in this, that Google et al. Are trying to figure out what something is about based on absolutely any clue that they have. So you may see them parsing image libraries to figure out that there's red cars in there. Yeah, at the end of the day, you're going to need language to describe a car and the color red, but you're not, once you've got that foundational semantics in the tank, then you can go ahead and start to extract clues from other places. So yeah, is semantics about language? I don't know. That's a question of semantics.
No, I mean, it was a bit of a silly question, but I really love the idea of clues, and that it's they're all trying to understand through the clues that they can grab, and the semantics is, at the end of the day, understanding and communication, but you can communicate through other manners than just text or from talking.
Yeah, and I think the classic SEO example of this is an image alt attribute, right? Where, yeah, it's a banana, but Google's going to probably understand it's a banana more if I say image alt and the value is banana, right? So language always plays a role, and the more in which things are labeled, the clearer it's going to be to a data consumer. But certainly the inference of meaning is not limited to language at a base level.
Ooh, the inference of meaning is not limited to language. Love it. I think that's my favorite moment so far. Thank you very much. That's going to be a quote later on. So on to Arnout. You said yesterday Google and Amazon have different approaches to voice search and answers. Can you explain what you meant there?
Well, yeah, this is my personal opinion, because the way I see Amazon and Google approaching voice and answering is it has always been Google's mission statement to answer every question. This is why you get 1 million results for every search. And there's something that occurred to me when going through search term reports in Google AdWords, whereas I'd see a lot of OK Google searches. So they were actually serving ads on a certain intent. But it tells you a lot about the way they are doing it. They are kind of just interpreting what you want or directly parsing it into the search engine. Whereas the way Amazon, in my opinion, is doing it, it works with actions. So they ask you to define actions, and from that, basically, when you talk to Alexa, she can fix stuff for you. She can order you a cab or whatever you want. And I think that is a fundamental difference in the way those two are approaching this whole answer thing. And I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it. And it really opened my eyes when I discovered this in a talk at SMX. And I started thinking about it. I think when you look at this, it has always been Amazon's drive to give that 100% customer satisfaction in a way. So you should always be able to deliver what you promise. Whereas Google will just say, I'll do my utmost and probably way more than you expect to give you answers. But I think that's where a big difference between those two lie. But then again, this is my vision on it. So the other speakers might have different opinions on this. But I think looking at this, it really makes you understand if you are a service-based company, you should develop an Alexa skill so you can actually tap into that. With other things like tapping into Google will be more about Google making them really understand what your website/service and everything is about in your company, so they can basically service you whenever the question asks for that. But this is my vision on that.
Well, Martha, what do you think about that? Very quickly.
I love it. Like I do. I think it's a great way of thinking about the different consumers. I think both are trying to. Well, I think Google, the behavior in which we ask questions to Google is part of like the consumer behavior that we've been doing for a long time, right? And although our behaviors change, so now when we look at, I was recently writing an article, and so it was like SEO jobs, right? Like, now you're actually seeing the job listings like directly in search. So I think we're also seeing Google change, and I consider it less about it's providing service, but it's also them owning the customer experience. So I sort of see it as like, why are they doing it from their own approach? If we stay longer on their search, they get more ad spend. But I do think like part of it's, as humans, we're changing our behavior, and we're going to force Google to also change because, we're asking Alexa certain questions, or, my kids had a voice off in our house where they were testing, which system could do better animal sounds. And Google actually used to be able to do dinosaurs and unicorns, but it can't anymore. And so then the question is like, is it unlearning? Right? So that's, maybe I'll leave it at that as, so, but I do think it's going to change as we as humans request and are changing the questions we're asking and the behaviors we're trying to do, which is going to then also sort of be this full system of how we see the technology change.
Yeah, Ivan Berkovic was saying, he's now with Amazon through Graphic. He was saying that Amazon might well win the war simply because that's how people are acting more and more these days, and Google's going to have to adapt. Aaron, have you got something to add to that? Sorry, you're muted, Aaron. We can't hear you.
How's that?
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Tomato, to a certain degree. I think that Alexa started out, Amazon started out a bit more transactionally. Alexa, how can I buy something on Amazon? Where Google, being the search engine, was more about answering questions. Also that I can, okay, Google, how can I answer this question for me so I really get to used to Google Home so I can eventually buy things from Google rather than Amazon. So it's, they're all doing the same things at the end of the day, understanding what the query is about and trying to come up with a reasonable response. And I think that, the flavors of that are kind of interesting and do definitely have nuances, but really, I'd throw the question back on your own organization and in terms of what you want to accomplish. Imagine you have no website, right? Which is really what voice search is. What is the most important information that you want to convey to your customer or consumer? And that's what you need to focus on. And it's all, the mechanisms by which the different smart speakers get there are kind of the same at the end of the day from that lens.
Okay, cool. Great stuff. Thank you. Next up, we're on back to Martha. Schema is a powerful way to structure data for Google and Amazon. Long and short term, you talked very briefly about it yesterday. I mean, for schema markup, long term and short term, I think you've almost answered the question already, but I'll let you have another quick crack at it.
Actually, Aaron couldn't have more perfectly set it up with his question of imagine there's no website, right? And so, people get really angry at me when I talk about this, but it's, I think, an important question to ask. So again, if we're seeing the customer experience, whether it be searching for jobs, events, answers in search, happening directly in the search engine or through voice search, where voice search we actually don't even have an interface, or let's take it one step further to augmented or virtual reality, we all of a sudden, the traffic's not coming to our website, right? And so now it's a question of, if people are getting service and answers, through these other means, our control point again is on how we want our data to be understood. And so I think, we're seeing the movement for the data sets, as sort of an example of moving towards this. So in order for true understanding of your content, the one thing that I suggest as sort of a tactic you can do to move towards understanding and the sort of future proofing, as I talk about, for where new consumers will come in and understand, is to make sure that you're not just like defining what the thing is, but also how it relates to other things in your business and other things on the web. And Aaron alluded to a little bit of this and around inferencing, right? So the robots are trying to infer and understand. And in order to do that, we need to help them. And so a local business is a great example where you can define if the local business is a headquarters and has sub-organizations. So what's the relationship between the two entities within the organization? You can use something like the property area served and use Wikipedia definitions or even links to sort of the city of, Guelph or Toronto or Vancouver to help define sort of, what are these areas they serve and where are those defined explicitly. You can also, we already today all use same as to say like, this is the organization and it's the same as the organization I've defined on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. But you can also then use, definitions and some more advanced things if you're using additional type or multi-type to define, let's say I'm a gas station, but I specifically sell diesel. You could actually use, additional type there. So again, part of it's like, semantics is all about triples, which is like defining how data is connected, and knowledge graphs, much as we often think of just Google's knowledge graph. And so I loved how Aaron's like, I work on a knowledge graph. Knowledge graph is sort of like how that data is all connected. And so in order to prepare for this future state, within the tactics of your doing in Schema. So one, think of that broader piece that I talked about at the beginning. But second, ask how things are connected. Anytime you're defining, let's say, a service on your website, ask how is it connected to this organization, or how is it, are my offers the organization can make those offers of the service. So ask how those things are connected. And there is a free tool on our website called Schema Paths. PATHS, that allows you to put two different entities in and will tell you how you can relate them. And this was created by my co-founder Mark, who got tired of reading schema.org to try to figure out how things are connected. But it will really, really help you sort of start building that knowledge graph for your company, in Schema versus just creating code.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, I mean, we had David Jada who's talking about thinking Schema when you're actually building or rebuilding your website, which I thought was a brilliant insight to get that right in at the beginning to decide what's connected to what and use the site to represent that alongside the Schema. And your answer is terribly complete. And that also comes back to a question I asked to Gennaro, which is, can we map Schema to a knowledge graph? And the answer was mostly, but not completely. But in my mind, these triples and the relationships between entities and attributes, just to me, it sounds the same. But I'll have to do some more research there. Thank you. Brilliant. Everybody who's listening or watching, please do ask questions. We're going to come to the questions in about 10 minutes. And this is a great opportunity to ask Aaron, Martha, and Arnout, who know rather a lot about the subject. So we've got 2 or 3 already. We're looking for some more. The big question which Arnout wanted to answer particularly is what's next? On the unstructured web, where are we going next with Amazon and Google? Please, Arnout, off you go.
Oh, well, it's me. I've always seen the way it's basically progressing is it's basically two-folded. I think we are creating a validation, kind of like a training set for their algorithms to understand that free text that flows out. So we're actually basically saying this is the same as this, and this fits into this. Whereas with that, crawlers and indexers can really start grasping what is on a certain web page. So I think at some point we might not need to do it as much, or maybe even not at all. And with that, I mean marking stuff up. However, I think it's really important to get all of the things that talk about your product to be connected and up to date, what you can find in the web. And I think this is where loads of companies are leaving things on the table, because it's kind of like the same as Google local search works, where you need to update your telephone numbers on multiple places. And if you can get that done, that will really help your relevancy of your listing. So I think that's one part of where this part is heading, in my opinion. And the next part will be, in the end, they will at some point not end up at your website anymore. So they will start using your service, but through other means. And that is it's interesting. It can happen in the SERP. It can happen through voice commands. It can happen through multiple ways. So I think those are the implications. Although I must say that for Google, and for Amazon as well, it's hard to do it in so many geographical areas because there is a lot of difference all over the place.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. That almost answered the question about will we need schema markup in a few years' time, and the answer is it will probably always be useful, but we're being the training set, and they'll be able to pull this data directly. Is that about right?
I see a finger from Martha, and I.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Martha. Yeah. The finger.
No, it's like well, the only thing I had is like so I think of this in two ways, and again with the framework that my business is built around structured data right now, right? So this is something we ask the question often about. So the first thing I often think about is like it is helping them. So when you think about like investing time and money, it's about sort of like if it's helping them do other things that are more important or more advanced faster, it's sort of like will they not keep using the stepping stool, the crutch to move faster on other things? So from a business perspective, I always think about like, well, if it's helping, why not? But as it goes away, I think the other thing that I think about is like, how does then the market or the company have a control point around their data? And so I think we're seeing the shift. And Aaron, I'd love your comment on this afterwards, is, like the data sets as sort of us publishing data sort of in sort of a bulk way and sort of helping this like open data world sort of come together and sort of, use sort of mass amounts of data. We're seeing sort of in fact check, sort of this data commons around, like have a central place to where you can almost like license your facts, right? And sort of say what it is. So I actually think we'll get to a point where today we're giving a lot of our content away, right, to help Google and Amazon. And I'll extend it to say, like, I don't think it's just Google and Amazon. Microsoft's going to come back with a vengeance on this. Like, there's lots of talk about Bing and their knowledge graph and everything's going on. Facebook's trying to figure out their voice solution and how they do engagement. They're heavy in the knowledge graph space. Apple is sort of have Siri. Some say that they're sort of less on the knowledge side, but still, they own a lot of that channel, right, through Apple. At what point will we then, will that exchange of information change and the imbalance about who's getting value from it change to where we'll then license our content? So whether we license it in a data feed that is structured to a common structure so that it can be easily consumed. Sounds like schema markup, or in are we going to sort of, get so advanced that we won't have to have common vocabularies, or we'll have common vocabularies and then build extensions. So I'll leave it at that because I think Aaron can probably build on it. But I think we'll get to a point where, the structure of our content will still be relevant, but we'll move to maybe a licensing model, and it's more than just the two players. Would be my two.
Oh, brilliant stuff. Yeah, more than just two players. Licensing, and I like the idea of a control point that you answered to Simon there. So, Aaron, what can you add to that?
That's great stuff, Martha. Thanks. I don't know. There's really different buckets of what is impacted by structured data annotations and what Google et al. Are capable of parsing, and the evolutionary path of those is quite different. I'll start with data sets that you just mentioned, Martha, where the semantics are opaque, right? And this is one of the reasons why dataset search is actually pretty unique and quite powerful, is that you just can't tell from a CSV what any of those fields are about. I mean, the example I used is there's a data set out there for cat ownership by postal code in the UK, right? But all you're going to see is a row that says 7, and then another one that's has something that looks like a postal code. You're not going to know that that's about number of cats per household, right? So that really opens up the possibilities for data where the semantics are opaque because it can't be inferred from web environment. Then you have another bucket where, yeah, you could probably infer that from the content, but Google really requires quite accurate information in order to provide accurate results. And job posting is a really good example of that. It could probably guess that the salary range is between, 30,000 and 50,000 pounds, but it doesn't want to guess in that circumstance, right? In order to give reliable job listings, you need to, and that's why it then becomes a requirement for employers to give that information. Another bucket is using structured data simply as a mechanism to populate the graph. You see that with recently with podcast, where you're now able to give a JSON LD feed of the podcast data, which is separated from any context, right? So in situations where you may not need a context in order to provide the semantics like podcasts. Google doesn't need to then crawl pages that are landing pages for podcasts to try and figure out what's it about. You can just provide that data directly. And then finally, there's that ginormous bucket of like information on the web, which is going to be aided by annotations, but aren't necessarily required. And that, I think, is Arnout's point earlier, what we were talking about there. And John Moo, I think, at one point said, they hope to come to a point where structured data is no longer necessary. And I think that that's kind of the biggest bucket of information out there. And we're going to see AI and ML improve. I'll let diffbot till that's probably the case. To Martha's point, anything is always going to be, annotations make Google guess less, but certainly the world we're going toward is one where, to the greatest degree possible, Google et al. can figure out stuff simply by parsing web content. I'll just finally kind of conclude this thought by saying, the shift that we've already seen, and I think the one where we're going to increasingly see all of this go, is that one way or another is all going structured. That is to say that the 10 blue links at the left-hand side of the page on desktop are going to become already much, increasingly less important than what we call the knowledge graph area. It's whatever is over there on the right that tends to be facts and data, which is really what people are mostly after, especially transactionally when they're looking for web content. And that's pretty much already been the case in mobile. There is essentially what's at the top, all of that facty knowledge graphy stuff, and then if you really want, there's some web pages you can look at, but don't put your stock in web pages in the future.
Okay, one question about diffbot. When they say they've got 10 billion entities and a billion facts. Do you believe that, and do you think that they're doing a much better job of extracting unstructured data than Google? And if so, will Google be able to do as good a job? And how did they get to that stage if they have?
Why not and don't know. That is to say, why not? I'll trust until I don't. I haven't really dug into the quality of the data. So. Okay. One of the characteristics of a knowledge graph, and this is really a term that if you dig into the history of it, Google made up, right? And there was no knowledge graph before the knowledge graph, because it's actually, some people say snidely that it's a marketing ploy by Google. But in any case, the knowledge graph. A characteristic of a knowledge graph is that it incorporates data from heterogeneous sources, from many different sources. And that's what you see with diffbot on a really grand scale. Google is already doing that, but from a more structured scale. So it really comes down to the quality of that data, which I haven't dug enough into diffbot to be able to say. But any knowledge graph, there's always going to be data quality issues. And Google's pretty good. diffbot, I'll have to see.
Yeah. Okay. Super. And Martha, did you want to add anything to the what's next question?
My brain was sort of just going to the kind of what's next after voice, and I bring this up only because I had an interesting conversation with Steve Macbeth at Microsoft. I like to interview these people. Aaron's been on my show, and he was the executive sponsor for Schema.org from Microsoft when they started in 2011. And he talked a lot about how they're using Schema as a way to connect augmented reality with reality. So as they get into this kind of VR, AR space, how do you, I sort of, talk about like if I'm shopping and I look at a product in a window, how do I know what brand it is, what the price is, and shift it? And could I order through voice, through my augmented reality, to have it come to my home? And then who owns that channel? And so I kind of say two things. So one, what comes after voice? Who's more than who's disrupting Google? Because we always talk about what Google's doing. So Amazon's disrupting Google. Who else is going to play? Who else is playing quietly? Like I said, my eyes on Microsoft just because of some of the things they keep talking around like using the Bing and Semantic, like their Semantic entity engine, which Steve talks about in this interview, is used hugely across Microsoft, and we're just seeing announcements now talking about like 360 using it, et cetera. So what's coming next? Who are also all the big players? And then the other piece is really a question of this owned channels. And I say this because as someone who has an Alexa and a Google Home in my home, one is what does it mean to e-commerce if Amazon owns the channel for ordering in our home, or if Google owns the ordering logistics channel? And someone asked a question around AdWords, and my hypothesis, I don't have evidence, so Martha instinct is that the business of search is going to change, right? Owning maybe the distribution channel or the ordering channel might become more important than necessarily serving ads. Providing service will become more important than just having ads. And that's just a hypothesis at this point, but I just see sort of, for me, it's like, how is my life going to change at home? And my background's at Cisco. So before we started Schema app, I worked 14 years at the enterprise networking company, which started the brand of Internet of Things. Well, we're not so different from the Internet of Things in this connected world and how we consume data and how we do service. And so then if we extend it beyond, augmented and virtual reality, maybe that's too far out there, even though Google Lens is what we've been talking about forever. But the fact that our Tesla is connected to the internet and answering questions as we drive, or the fact that like I really hate going grocery shopping, and every time I add things to my grocery list, if it actually just knew the brand I was buying, like could they just then deliver my groceries to my house? And if I put things in the same structured way in my fridge, would it actually know what's empty? And so I think as we think about, the experience that us as consumers are expecting from the knowledge graph and understanding content and context and inferencing based on personalization, the future is I think very different, and we might see just like the business of search engines or business of search change drastically. So I'll leave it at that.
Cool. Yeah, great. So what I'm understanding is in your house, you're going to have a structured fridge where everything has its place. And as soon as it's empty, it knows that it needs to order it, and it's always the same brand. Brilliant. So I don't know if everybody would have such a structured fridge.
I'm not that organized, but if it could at least understand my personal preference, right, which I think can overcome the need for me to be organized and structured, then it just needs to know that I'm out of butter and that I buy Organic Valley unsalted butter every 2 weeks.
No, brilliant. In fact, I was looking at it and thinking we all had to be structured. In fact, you're right. It's a way for us to be even less structured than we are today, which is going to be quite an achievement.
Informed through knowledge, right?
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, great. We're coming towards the end here. The position zero profile, I don't know if you've seen this kind of developing. We've had people giving ideas about how each topic affects position zero, can help us with position zero. You can all read it there, from the Semantic HTML5 to the blocks of content, Gutenberg, which I really enjoyed. Have any of the points we've covered today, can they add something to the position zero profile, as I'm calling it, i.e. how can they help us with position zero? Arnout.
Well, I think consistency and using, as Aaron said and as Martha said, a schema markup to provide a deeper context on what your page / content is about. I think that is one of the main things. get to that.
No, I like that. Consistency comes up. It's just occurred to me, your name is Hellmans, and Simon Cox was saying that you mayoed one of his earlier questions. So the mayonnaise did come in. We've got consistency here. Thank you.
But I think that's a big thing. So consistency, and we're constant. What got me thinking is, how does this work in a rebrand? Say you're going to rebrand a business, because there's a lot out there that most people don't even know about, that tell search engines something about your service you've been providing. And if you don't link it to your new brand, how does that work? So I think that's a big one. And I think the other one is really satisfying the user is an enormously important one as well. And we keep on forgetting this. And it's also because loads of people are still looking at vanity metrics, in my opinion. They go and look at traffic and clicks and everything, but they don't look at, did I actually add value to that visit? Because I think those are the those are the ingredients to get to this position. Simple answer.
Sorry, brilliant. Yeah, Aaron, have you got any insights into this that I can add to the Position Zero profile?
I don't know that you meant to say this, but you referred to traffic as a vanity metric. But I like that. I like that a lot, and that's really at the core of the feature Position Zero. And Zero suggests, Position Zero is above the SERPs, where you send traffic to websites, and that's where we're going. There's what value are you providing to the consumer in your response? And Martha, kudos to you, coining the term answer engine optimization. You're not providing a linked search description so that people can go visit your website, where you can then send them down your preferred conversion funnel and spam them with your damn newsletter and stuff. Position Zero means give me the facts, Jack, and make the most of it. And it's a hard and challenging and fascinating new world, I think. You can't say, hey, Google, let me explore some website via my home. It's not going to happen. So
no, perfect. I know, it's brilliant. And Martha, last little point, have you got anything to add to the Position Zero or?
So just quality content you already talked about. The about field, like anytime in Schema, you can use about and link to something that helps define that as key. But then I guess maybe I'll ask a question back, which can maybe be a topic of the next webinar, is how do you measure, what are these new measures in the AEO world when traffic isn't getting to your website? How do you truly measure that you're adding value?
Oh dear, yeah. Oh dear, that's a big question.
I'll leave it at that. We only have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, given that we've got 4 minutes left. Thank you very much to all of you. For me, that was absolutely brilliant. I mean, my head, like last week and the week before, is kind of spinning a little bit, and that doesn't mean I'm mad, but might be. And I'll have to re-listen to all this to really get it in my brain. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Arnout, and thank you, Aaron. It was brilliant. I noticed, Aaron, that you've got French Tintin books behind you. That means you speak French too.
Well, like Martha, Martha can attest to the fact that us Canadians, because we're officially a bilingual country, simply by reading cereal boxes, eventually it all starts to move in. So
brilliant.
But,
okay.
Oui, j'aime beaucoup le Tintin.
Brilliant. We had that conversation just before you arrived earlier on. Right, a question from Simon Cox. Excuse me. Who did? Before we finish, what do the panel think of Sir Tim Berners-Lee's new initiative to redirect the web with Inrupt, a movement to decentralize the web? Is there any chance that will work with such a commercial web now? I've no idea what that question means. Aaron, can you explain it to me?
Sure. So it's a new initiative by TBL, as we call him in our circles, that facilitates the ownership of your personal data and how it's used by different individuals and corporations. Very early initiative. I just learned about this a little while ago. Uses linked data principles for a lot of it, so that's what interests me there. Can it work in a commercial web? I think that's the reason it's being created, is that there is no mechanism in the commercial web, that it's become the Wild West. So I'm hopeful. I'm definitely keeping an eye on this initiative, and I think sooner or later, but other people are just going to go bah, or they're going to revolt. And I think we're in the revolt stage where every organization on earth has just been using our personal data willy-nilly without any sort of constraints or control, and this is an initiative to help address that.
Yeah, great. Wonderful stuff. There's another question from True, which isn't really a question. So thank you, Martha. That was my leaning. Okay, it's coming to voice and wearables that do most of the tedious day-to-day work for us, which is what you were talking about. Less and less ads required. That's the big question. And somebody else asked about that a little bit earlier on. Where are we going with ads if everyone's just ordering stuff? Only Amazon are going to win that game.
Well, I think it just means that the commercial, how you make money is going to have to change, right? So just like we're having to, aggregator sites, I think, are really disrupted in how we're seeing Google and others sort of, pull in all that information about flights or jobs or events and so forth. So I think it's, it's actually good for business. It's going to force these, large companies to think about how they make money differently. And I think it's going to really then also change, where do marketers invest, right? I talk to companies and they're like, oh, well, I like that I can predictably get traffic from ads, but as we try to talk about future proofing, there's little to no investment going on sort of understanding and ownership of content moving forward. So I think sort of both to satisfy Tim Berners-Lee initiative, marketers need to think about sort of managing that machine channel or managing their brand for machines.
Yeah, managing brand for machines is going to be one of the future seasons. So that's a really nice place to leave it. That was absolutely brilliant from all of you, Arnout, Aaron, and Martha. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming along, talking about all that. For me, that was incredibly informative. I'll just take the time to finish off here to say that next week, every Tuesday, same time, we're going to be doing this until the middle of December. Next week, episode 7, we're going to move on to the knowledge graph. We're moving from blue to kind of dirty orangey color. The knowledge graph, how well is Google doing in understanding the world? So it's going to be an analysis of how good we think Google has become at, or is building its knowledge graph, which is going to be a really interesting discussion. So please do join us next week. See you then. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, guys. That was brilliant.
Thanks, everyone.